Show People from 1928, an absolutely delightful comedy directed by the usually more serious King Vidor, um, starring Marion Davis, one of the greatest comedians of the silent era. She plays Peggy Pepper, a girl from Georgia with dreams of Hollywood and of becoming a great star. As the film opens, we see her and her father driving into town with an attitude of, hello, here we are, acting as if, as if Hollywood had just been waiting for them. So they go around, trying to make connections, and soon enough, they meet this nice young man, Billy, who tells her that that he might be able to help her, might be able to get her role. She's very excited, but that's before she finds out that the studio she's going to be working for is only a B movie studio that puts out silly slapstick comedies for cheap, and she thinks she's too good for it. Nonetheless, she takes on the job and she becomes very successful at it. And soon enough, she gets, an offer from a big time studio, and a chance to become, a serious actress. Success soon goes to her head. She now calls herself Patricia Peppoir instead of Peggy Pepper, and she abandons her friends, at the old studio, including Billy, with whom she became romantically involved with, and who's a really nice guy. Some people, I think, regard it as a satire. I think it has too much affection for these characters and for the movie industry and for Hollywood to really be called a satire. But it certainly has, little criticisms here and there, but it's all done in a very loving and affectionate way. If you love movies, you're gonna love this film, period. It's also notable for featuring a few cameos of big stars of the time, including John Gilbert, Douglas Fairbanks Sr., and a bunch of other people. The Western star William S. Hart, and most notably Charlie Chaplin. It's funny, it's witty, and it's really romantic too, in a really sweet way. It's a time machine back to the early days of film, and absolutely just wonderful. The Mark of Zorro from 1940, directed by Ruben Mamoulian. Probably the only Zorro film I've ever seen in my whole life. And I think also the first swashbuckler I ever saw. A genre that I never really paid much attention to. Really, the only reason why I saw the film at all is Tyrone Power. He's one of my favorite actors and biggest old Hollywood crushes. And I've seen all of his films, and this role is really one of his funnest, juiciest roles, or rather, it's a double role. So I guess the story a lot of people are familiar with. He's a nobleman originally from California, but he spends time in Spain where he gets his military education, and then he's called back home because his father, who was the governor, was forced out of his position by a really corrupt and unjust man. And so he goes back home, and then he comes up with this alter ego, Zorro, who goes around and fighting for justice and fighting this new governor and trying to bring him down, and while at the same time fighting for the justice of the people. He also falls in love with the governor's daughter, coincidentally, played by a fresh faced Linda Darnell, only 17 years old at the time. Uh, Linda Darnell and Tyrone Power made several movies together, I think four movies. And they always have great chemistry and, of course, look really beautiful together. They're both so beautiful. Because sometimes people say that that Tyrone Power was always more beautiful than his leading ladies, with the exception of Linda Darnell and Jean Tierney. Those were the only women who didn't look shabby next to him. One of the highlights of the film is a sword fight between Tyrone Power and Basil Rathbone, which is really full of energy and so beautifully choreographed. And some people read a sexual, homosexual subtext into it too, because it has a few moments that are, yeah, I guess quite erotic if you want to see it that way. But really the most fun part about it is Tyrone Power in that double role. You know, he really gets to show off his comedic abilities and he I love Tyrone in comedies. I think he was so suited for them, and in my opinion didn't make enough of them. And you know how he switches back between those alter egos. You know, on one hand, this, you know, effeminate Don Diego who has an interest in fashion and perfumes and, you know, likes to take baths and and then on the other hand, you know, he plays this, yeah, badass outlaw.
You'll forgive me for being late, Signora. They heated the water for my bath too early. It was positively tepid. By the time more was carried and properly scented, life can be trying, don't you think?
The Clock from 1945, directed by Vincent Minnelli, a project that was found for Judy Garland, who wanted to take a break from strenuous musicals. She had just done Meet Me in St. Louis and wanted to, yeah, take it a little easier because musicals, you know, they're very, very demanding, and wanted to do, you know, a straight dramatic role. This is a really special film in its simplicity. It's so stripped down and so simple and has such a realness to it. It's a totally simple story about a soldier played by Robert Walker who is on a 2-day leave in New York City, and he, you know, accidentally or, you know, by fate, runs into Judy Garland's character, who is a secretary. You know, it can really be kind of seen like a precursor to these movies, like, you know, like the Before Sunrise trilogy. You know, kind of like the sort of movie we see, you know, more often today. You know, where two characters just kind of have, you know, take a stroll somewhere and just walk and talk, basically, and explore a city. You know, you didn't really see that a lot back then. So, but this film is like that, and it gives it a kind of like a modern feel, I guess. They just spent um, 2 days exploring New York City, or what looks like New York City, rather, because it wasn't shot in New York, it was shot in an MGM backlot. um, they even went as far as recreating Penn Station for an immense amount of money, but it was still cheaper than shooting it in New York. So it's a very gentle and simple story about these two people who meet and connect and, you know, don't want to lose each other again. And we just observe them. The whole film just takes place over that weekend. You know, it doesn't go beyond that. And there's a bittersweetness in the air, you know, because we're all aware that, you know, after that weekend is over, he will have to go back to war, and what will happen to him, and we don't know. And I think what adds to that mood is the fact that both Judy Garland and Robert Walker were two people who, you know, who were both battling personal demons. Garland was growing more and more dependent on prescription drugs, whereas Robert Walker had, you know, had big alcohol problem, often drinking the whole night through, and then in the morning coming back to the set. And I just think that all of that kind of bleeds into the film and gives it a certain sadness. I think it's one of Judy Garland's most beautiful performances, really understated and very natural.